Episcopal churches come in all shapes and sizes. There are grand cathedrals that are so big that the Statue of Liberty could stand up inside of them. And there are humble chapels that can fit just a few people. Some of them are made of stone, some are made of wood, some are brick, some have great big walls of glass. Some churches are richly decorated with very traditional furnishings and symbols. Some are incredibly modern and sparse, but there are some basic parts of a church that can pretty much be found in just about every Episcopal church. The part of the church where the congregation sits is called the nave. In most Episcopal churches, this is the part that has all of the rows of pews facing in one direction. We get the word nave from the same root word as of navy. It means ship or boat. In many church naves, if you look up, you can imagine yourself looking down into the hull of a ship. In every Episcopal church, there's going to be an altar. This is the holy table where the Eucharist is celebrated. It's almost always the first thing you see when you enter into an Episcopal church. It's front and center. This is a clear statement on what we find to be most important. There's going to be a place where the scriptures are read from, usually called a lectern. Sometimes churches have a lectern and a pulpit, the place where the sermon is delivered from. Sometimes there's just one reading station, which the readings and sermon are set in. In the National Cathedral in Washington, you can see the smaller lectern and the much, much bigger pulpit. And somewhere in the building of a church, there's going to be a baptismal font, the place where people are baptized into the Christian faith. Sometimes the font is by the front door of the church as a reminder that the font is the entryway into the Christian life. Sometimes it's up by the altar as a reminder that baptism is the entryway to the Eucharist. Sometimes the font is tucked away and only brought out when there is a person to be baptized. If all you had was some pews, an altar, a font, and a place to read from, you'd have everything you needed to have a church. Traditional churches are broken down into some basic sections. We've already talked about the nave, where the congregation sits. Then there's the choir, where the choir sits. And then there's a sanctuary where the altar is, and which is oftentimes separated from the choir with an altar rail. Sometimes you'll hear people call the whole room of the church the sanctuary, but technically it's just the part around the altar. One last little note. In most Episcopal churches, you'll also find an important chair. It's usually a chair that is left empty on most weeks of the year. It's the bishop's chair. It's reserved for when the bishop comes. When it's not in use, it's a reminder of the bishop's presence with us. Remember, we're an Episcopal church, and Episcopal means bishop. We believe that the ministry of the apostles continues on in the ministry of our bishops today. This little chair in our churches says that even when the bishop isn't physically with us, the bishop is still spiritually with us.